Welcome back to the Business Immigration Benchmark. Happy New Year. We hope you had a lovely holiday break. Today, we're back in our new studio here in Santa Monica, thanks to our friends at Lake Effect Films. Today, we're diving into top-of-mind issues in 2025. By the time this episode drops, we will have seen the new Trump administration inaugurated. We expect there'll be lots of headlines, executive orders, and news surrounding immigration. So, of course, the change of administration is top of mind this week and will continue to be as we see, like I said, changes, executive orders, headlines, and some more speculation surrounding immigration in 2025 under the new Trump administration. There's been no shortage of speculation in the months leading up to this change of administration and a tremendous amount of conversation on X. While I don't think it's helpful to dive into the rhetoric surrounding the speculation of immigration, I think we can turn to what we saw in the first Trump administration, as well as look to what is currently the infrastructure a Trump administration could use to implement compliance and enforcement actions. At best, we are speculating on what we saw in the previous Trump administration, but of course, a lot has changed since the first Trump administration. So at best, it again is a lot of speculation about what we saw with Buy American, Hire American, whether that will be a policy they even turn to again in 2025 and the years to come. So what am I following? What I'm looking at is the current infrastructure in immigration space. So what are the regulations that the Trump administration can use to implement compliance and enforcement applications? And, most recently, under the Biden administration, we saw the H-1B Modernization Rule, which had some really favorable updates, or rather, using the rulemaking process, the Biden administration put in a rule as the deference for previously filed immigration applications and petitions. So prior to the H-1B Modernization Rule, we saw a deference policy, meaning that a change in administration could take away the deference that we now see as a rule given this new H-1B Modernization Rule. So that's a huge win for employers for stability. This means that if you have a previously approved H-1B petition, O-1 petition, any non-immigrant visa status, if the case has previously been approved and in 3 years or 2 years later you're filing an extension, if there's been no change in material facts, if there's not been fraud, the government or USCIS is required to approve that extension. So that's a huge win for stability for folks because, of course, we want to make sure that folks who have had a status in the past can continue to maintain their status. But the H-1B Modernization Rule also opened the door to much more site investigations for H-1B workers or companies that sponsor H-1B workers. And so I think this is ripe for an administration to use this rule to have increased site visits, which effectively boil down to testing the company's compliance for their H-1B program and testing the individual H-1B workers' compliance with the H-1B. What this site visit provision in the H-1B Modernization Rule does is that it really opens up the investigatory powers for an H-1B investigation at the employer's workspace, neutral locations, and even the private residence of the H-1B worker if that home residence is listed on the underlying H-1B petition. If USCIS is unable to verify the facts of the petition, meaning there's no one at the work site or the communication at the work site is unable to confirm the duties of the H-1B worker, the management of the H-1B worker, the control and supervision of the H-1B worker, for example, it could result in a notice of intent to deny that underlying H-1B petition. So that's all to say, what are the practical takeaways from what we believe may be increased site visits at work sites, at home residences, at third-party work sites that the H-1B worker may be servicing. I think, the initial steps are to do some best practice compliance. And this might feel really scary if you haven't already done it, but there's like two things that you want to be thinking about when you're thinking about increased H-1B site visits. You're thinking about what is the employer's H-1B compliance and what is the individual H-1B worker's compliance. And you're going to want to audit the data at those two levels. So firstly, I know I have many clients that are still in a work from home situation. They are still permitting hybrid, or some of my clients have continued to embrace the fully remote workplace. And so the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you have audited all the work from home locations and the work sites of your H-1B workers. So this is calling reports to your internal data. Many clients have really sophisticated, HR systems, HRIS systems that they're using, and working with your immigration counsel to pull reports to see what is on the underlying H-1B petition and reconciling them. I think the other thing to think about is that although you may have an HRIS system and you encourage all your employees to update their home addresses, you might find that those are stale, that folks aren't always updating their home addresses. In fact, you might come to realize this with all your W-2 filings for your employees. Many of these folks are receiving their W-2s electronically. But if you are mailing them, you might find that those addresses are stale. So a communication out to your employees is going to be really important as part of this data audit cleanup. You're going to want to communicate to your employees, we need updated addresses. We need updated home addresses in our HRIS systems, because we also want to make sure we're compliant with your H-1B work sites if you are using a work from home work site in your H-1B petition because you permit remote or hybrid remote work sites. So that's going to be the first piece, is calling to all your foreign national employees, in fact, all your employees, to update their home addresses in your HRIS system, and then reconciling that with the underlying H-1B petitions if work site or home work sites are listed on the H-1B petitions, to make sure that those are reflective and accurate. The second compliance piece is to make sure that the H-1B worker, and in fact, all non-immigrant visa workers, are updating their addresses with the government. So this is another instruction you're going to want to push out to all of your non-immigrant visa workers, but especially your H-1B workers, is to update their home address with USCIS. The way that they do this is through the form AR11. They can do this through the USCIS online portal. They create an online account for themselves and then disclose their home address to the government. Now, I know many immigration attorneys in the visa approval packets provide this information to foreign nationals to be sure to update the USCIS of their home address. It is a compliance requirement for every non-immigrant visa holder to complete an AR11, update the government with their home address whenever they move. I will say this just gets forgotten. And even if your employees think that they've done it, this call to action for updating the H-1B workers compliance or your non-immigrant visa workers compliance, you're going to want to suggest that they do it again anyway. If they can't remember, do it again anyway, and give them the instructions to complete the AR11 so that their personal compliance obligation is being met in the new year. So it's going to be an overwhelming 2025. There's going to be a lot of changes. These are some of the compliance issues that I know are going to be top of mind, and we'll continue to discuss what are some bite-sized ways to approach best practices for compliance. I think that's going to be the issue of the year. Last year we saw a lot of conversation around cost containment. I think this year that's certainly still in the mix. But we're going to have to be doing the best practices in compliance to make sure our programs are running smoothly and aren't under additional scrutiny in this era of change of administration. Thanks for tuning in. As always, shoot me a message on LinkedIn if you've got any questions or feedback on the podcast. Catch you next time.